Welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. I'm Len Mort,
And I'm Dory Cronin.
and today we're doing something a little different. We're standing here in front of the town hall at the Civil War Memorial. Memorial Day is not far away, it's this coming weekend. But our program today is not about just Memorial Day. It's about history, Civil War. And we're going to talk about history when we take a short walk. Also, I want you to remember that not only the Civil War veterans, but Memorial Day is this weekend. Every day should be Memorial Day because the veterans have fought and died that we could be free in this country. So remember the veterans every day. Make every day a Memorial Day.
I agree. And the town of Millbury also played an important part in the Civil War. And as we take a walk up to the Asa Waters Mansion, you're going to find out a little bit more about the history of Millbury and how it was an important part of the Civil War.
There's a great deal of history in this community that is lost behind the scenes. People drive by old buildings in town, they see the building, and they appreciate the building. But what created that building is lost. And today we're going to talk a little about those lost bits of history. And we're going to meet a special guest. Come with us on a short walk. What do you think about the history in Millbury, Dory?
Actually, just doing some research lately, I didn't realize how much history there was in Millbury.
There's a great deal, especially along the Blackstone River and the canal. Back many years ago, the canal opened up the Industrial Revolution for the town of Millbury. And when they opened up the canal, that changed everything. There's a lot of history in Millbury that is all based around the Blackstone Canal and the river. We had many inventions that came from Millbury, as well as Worcester and the surrounding communities, Sutton as well. People drive up and down the road here. They pass this mansion every day, and they really look at the building, and they say, there is a nice looking building, but why is that building there? And what was behind the scenes that created that building?
I agree. When they did originally build this mansion, it was prior to the Blackstone Canal. So a lot of effort was spent putting this together.
And the expense of this building, where did they come with the money to build this building? They had a manufacturing facility here in town. And what we're going to find today with our guest is we're going to be discussing what they actually made in this community. You'll find that the Waters family, their name was synonymous with firearms. They also made sawmill saw blades and scythes and sickles. But today we're going to be discussing the firearms that they made, where they made them, and how those firearms were significant to our freedom. Let's go meet our guest.
Hey guys.
How you doing?
How you doing?
Hi.
I'm in white.
I'm in white.
Dory Cronin.
Dory, nice to meet you. Hi, Lenny.
How you doing, Armin?
Okay, we're inside now. We're in the East Parlor of the Asa Waters Mansion, and we're here with Armin White, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the guns that he has here.
Thank you, Dory. Lenny called me up and asked me if I'd be interested in talking about the Waters weapons. I have a collection of Waters guns. And I really didn't know anything about Asa Waters until I got appointed to the task force over 16 years ago when we started restoring this building. And I found out what Mr. Waters did for a living. And he manufactured firearms. Well, that's pretty cool. So, to make a long story short, I started collecting them. My goal was to have a musket and a pistol for each of my grandchildren. So when I someday pass from the school, they can all get that, you know, history. I've accomplished my goal and then some. But it was interesting for me when I started delving into the history of Asa Waters. In this building here, you're mainly talking about Asa Waters II. Okay? He was born on the corner of Road Street, up here on West Main Street. His father, well, at that time it was Sutton. Okay? So Asa Waters II, I think, was born in 1769, something like that. And he apprenticed with his father. Now his father, and his father before him, and his father before him, and probably his father before him. They started in England. They were probably one of the first gun manufacturers when guns were first being invented. They went back to the old matchlocks guns. They came to this country in the 1600s. They made guns for the Pilgrims. They made guns for the Revolution. Okay? So, but to get back to Asa II, he had an older brother named Elijah. And like I said, they apprenticed with their father, who was a gunsmith. And in 1797, something like that, they purchased a piece of land that started down here on South Main Street, on the north side of the Blackstone River. That came all the way up to Elm Street here. Now, I don't know how far it went back, but I'm assuming that it went back this way to the river, because he donated that land to the academy, to the town. That used to be the Millbury Academy. And he also owned the Felters Company now. That was a Stillwater mill. There were 3 mills he had there. He had a sash and blind shop, he had a felt mill, and another mill, a Stillwater mill. So he, Asa Waters II was quite a businessman. He had about 7 mills in town. He had Cordis Mills, he had the Armory, he had those 3 over there. He had a Burling Mill, which was on the Blackstone Canal up by Lock at McCracken Road. And he had a mill in Sutton, Wilkinson Mill. Okay, so I'm not very knowledgeable about them. But the Armory, when they bought the land, he and his brother Elijah had set up a shop there. And a blacksmith shop and some other buildings, and they made scythes and tools and skids for sleighs and things, saw blades and stuff like that. And there was a grist mill on the left side of South Main Street that was included when they purchased too. But there was no factory then. In 1808, they acquired a government contract to make muskets. It had to be identical to the specs of the plan, you know, whatever the musket was. So he got a 5-year contract to supply the U.S. government with 1,000 muskets a year for 5 years. And I think it was $10.35 a stand they were paid, which the stand was a musket and a bayonet. And his contract was renewable every 5 years. Well, his contract was renewed up until 1845. He made guns in that armory, when all of a sudden all armories were told to stop by the U.S. government, but that's another story. I'll talk about that later. So anyway, they built the factory after they got the contract, from what I understand. There was no factory until they got the government contract. So they built the factory down there by the river, where now the VFW club is. In 1915, some organization came and surveyed the property. And at that time, it was very grown over, but they could see the foundations of all the buildings. And now you can't see anything. But the Waters brothers built a dam down there. They built the factory, which went for about 300 feet along the river and varied from 30 to 100 feet wide, different buildings. So it was quite a complex. And they manufactured their muskets down there. Now, he didn't make pistols yet. His contract was for muskets. And after 5 years, the government renewed his contract. And then someplace around 1817, like that, he made an invention on how to make barrels. Asa Waters was quite an inventor. I'm aware of 2 specific inventions that he made, but I'm sure there were others. And I'm not the person to be talking about all the specifics. I just know a few things that I've learned from reading about him and doing different things. But up until that point, they used to make the musket barrels by hand. They were hand stamped and hand rolled and hand welded. It was quite a job. And so he invented a water-powered trip hammer. It was run by a foot treadle, and it would slam the barrel or mold the barrel with concave dies up to 400 times a minute.
But I bet up until then it must have been very hard to keep everything consistent, right?
It was very difficult, because what they did to get the barrels round is after the blacksmith or the barrel maker would make the barrel, To try to get around, they would grind it on a stone, going around like that. So you get imperfections in the barrel, and if it was too thin in one place and you fired it, it would explode. So one interesting thing that I really liked when I read it was that I always thought they proof-fired the muskets before the government accepted. That is completely false.
Really?
Yes, it is. They proof-fired only the barrels. They had a proving, and it wasn't called proofing, it was called proving. They had a proving building, which was probably a stone building, because it had to be able to withstand the balls hitting it, whatever.
Right.
And they had a metal plate, and they laid out all the barrels of the muskets in a row, and they probably held them down with another plate, and the openings were all facing in a certain direction. Then they laid a trail of gunpowder connecting all the barrels, and then the trail of gunpowder would go outside the proving building, and there was a big bank of dirt against one wall. They'd go outside, the U.S. inspector would go outside, they'd close the door, they'd light the charge, and you'd count how many barrels you had. If you had 30 barrels in it, you'd wait for 30 banks. Okay, if you only had 29, you had a problem. Okay, so you waited for 30 banks.
Watch out.
And then you waited a while, then you carefully opened up the door, went in, let the smoke clear, and then you went in. And any barrel that exploded was automatically rejected. Oh, by the way, the first proving firing was a much larger charge than the gun would ever use. The gun was designed to take about 144 grain charge with 10 grains in the pan. Okay? They would put a big charge in there to test the barrel. Then after the first testing, they do another testing. They go in and anything that was blown up, it went thrown in the pile, and it was probably get retooled and remelted and used to make more barrels. Then they do a second testing with a more accurate load in it, sometimes still a little heavier. So sometimes in the first proving, a barrel would have a crack in it, a hairline crack, and they wouldn't see it right away. You know, so they fire it again. If it had a crack in it, then it would usually explode the second time. But even then, after the second proving, the inspector would go in and scrutinize each barrel, inside and out, any crack at all, and discard it. Now, back in those days, I don't remember the gentleman's name, I wish I did, but the man who did the welding, and it's in one of the papers, the history papers, and he got paid by piecework. So when a barrel failed, and if Asa Waters determined that the barrel failed because of his welding, he was docked 28 cents a barrel. Plus the miscellaneous charges that went along with making the barrel and everything else. So it turned out to be 85 cents a barrel in those days that the man would lose. So he'd have to make 3 perfect barrels just to break even for every barrel that failed.
Right.
So he was very careful to make sure his barrels passed, in other words. And very few of Asa Waters' barrels actually failed. But anyway, the reason for his invention was because of this difficult method of making the barrels. So he made 2 critical inventions that the U.S. government was just very happy to hear about. One was that trip hammer, to mold them with concave dies. And the other one was a lathe, to turn the barrels so they'd be perfectly round and perfectly uniform diameter.
Each and every one.
Each and every one would be perfect. Now, Asa Waters II only had one son. That was Asa Holman. He was also born up there on the corner of Road Street. And when Asa Holman was a young man, he used to hang around with Thomas Blanchard up in West Millbury, who had a shop. I don't know which side of the road it was, but it was up in West Millbury. And across the street from his shop was Asa Kenny, who had a brass foundry. And so he became very, very familiar with the foundry and Thomas Blanchard. And, well, this is all trivia stuff. It's got nothing really to do with the guns, but Asa Holman knew so much about Thomas Blanchard that he wrote a biography on him in his later years, and it was published in Harper's Weekly. Okay.
Our program is also broadcast in Sutton, and Mr. Blanchard, Thomas, was it? That's where he came from, Sutton. And to tell us about his invention that also had a great deal to do with Waters.
At that time, it was Sutton, but now it's Millbury. Just like Road Street was Sutton when Asa Holman was born, because Millbury became Millbury in 1813. So in 1808, when Asa Holman was born, he was born in Sutton. But Thomas Blanchard invented the eccentric lathe. Now, I never knew what an eccentric lathe was. I knew a lathe, okay, but his eccentric lathe could mold a shape of that stock. It could mold odd shapes by the use of cams on the lathe. It was quite an invention. He is credited with the invention. Asa Waters is credited with the patent for the lathe turning, the barrel turning lathe, and for the trip hammer. But they work closely with each other, okay? So, I thought that was interesting about how they proved the guns. But after they got done proving them, they would assemble the guns completely. And then when they were ready for inspection to be shipped to the armories, the government inspector would come and take the guns apart again. And they were really scrutinized. Not fired again. And then put back together, then they were accepted and shipped. There were 7 inspectors, and I don't remember all of their names, from 1808 to 1830, and we have no record of the inspectors after 1830 that I know of. And that was their job, to come to the Waters factory and inspect the firearms. But one thing Asa Waters II did is he allowed all the armories in the United States, all the private armories, of which there were 5 more beside his. The armories were in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, private armories that the government contracted. In 1808, the Congress passed a law forming these private armories to produce guns to the United States. The government had 2 of its own armories, the Springfield Armory you're aware of, and Harper's Ferry in West Virginia. Those were the government armories, plus there were 6 private armories. So Asa Waters, being the nice guy that he was, and a smart man, he says, I'm going to let everybody use this invention, this patent, without charging them. But could you please kind of promise me that you're going to renew my contract in 5 years? Right. And the government says, sure, that'd be great. So he even wrote an article to the President of the United States one time, detailing how much money his invention saved the government. And Harper's Ferry didn't adopt it immediately, but Springfield did. And he told the government that if Harper's Ferry had adopted his invention when Springfield did, they would have saved like $50,000. In those days, that was an awful lot of money.
Right.
Okay. So, but his invention was used by all the people and not charged. And that, in 5 years after 1808, his contract was renewed. And his contract was renewed up until the factory manufactured guns until 1845. You know, maybe I'm talking too much. If I am, just tell me.
Not at all.
Okay,
No.
all right. But in I'm going to get up in a minute and I'll take a gun and I'll show it to you and let you hold it if you want. But I think the history of the whole thing is very interesting. Now, these private armories, they stake their whole livelihood on making guns. So they hired people. They were really craftsmen and artisans that worked on making these guns. They made good money. They built homes in the area and they built up the village. Well, by the way, the center of town got its nickname, Armory Village, because of Asa Waters Armory.
And you can see the historical marker that they put out on the common.
Yeah, but that's the reason it's called Armory Village. So these 6 private armories in the country were making firearms, thinking they were good to go for the rest of their life. They didn't have to worry about a thing. And all of a sudden, in 1845, an order came down from the War Department to cease and desist, shut down. You're not making any more guns. Contract or no gun. They just shut them all down immediately. And they did. They didn't know why. At the time, nobody knew why. But you talk about politics today, well, there was politics back then too.
I'm sure.
It turns out that the man in charge of the contracts was secretly diverging any extra money to his own private cannonball factory in Richmond, Virginia. And so therefore all the other armories got shut down. This man was making all the money. Well, when it was discovered, he was a brigadier general. And his name is not in the articles. You know, there's so many articles I can't remember all of it. But he was a brigadier general, and when it was discovered what he did, they demoted him from brigadier general, gave him a dishonorable discharge, took his name off the Army Corps roster of officers, and disgraced him, threw him out of Washington, D.C. That was in 1845. So for 15 years after that, none of the armories made any guns. Asa Waters retooled and went back to making tools. He was a smart man. Plus he had the other mills to support him. And there was one armory in Connecticut, Whitney, that retooled, and they were making metal tools as well. The other 4 armories completely went out of business.
I was going to say, if they didn't have the background to...
And it devastated a lot of people.
Right.
Another thing that happened was that just before the Civil War broke out, there was a gentleman named Polk. He might have been the Secretary of War at the time, I don't remember his title. But he was from Virginia. He knew the war was coming. He secretly transported all the guns from the northern arsenals, like the Watertown Arsenal and Gardner Arsenal, all the different arsenals, down south. So when the war broke out,
They were already well armed.
where were the guns?
Yeah.
Down south. So now the North needed guns. Well, the North only had one armory now, Springfield. Harper's Ferry is in West Virginia. Guess who owns that one, all right? So the government, in a panic, contacted all the armories. 4 of them were gone, just disappeared. The only 2 left were Asa Waters and this Whitney armory. So being that the government was in the real bind, and Asa Waters and the other armory were able to retool and get going in manufacturing guns, they could almost command the price that they wanted. And Asa Waters, being a smart man that he did, not only contracted for a certain price for the guns he was making for the Civil War, but he also had the government agree that they would pay him extra for the inspector's time, for the proving, for the boxing, and for the shipping. Whereas in the first contracts, he kind of like absorbed all those costs, you know. So he was a pretty smart guy, pretty good businessman. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Asa Waters II and his brother Elijah built a factory, but Elijah died a short time afterwards. So Asa's son, Asa Holman, became a partner in the business. So some of the guns, the name of the business was A. Waters and Sons. Some guns are marked that, but most guns are stamped A. Waters. When Mr. Waters II died, upstairs in his bedroom here on Christmas Eve, 1841, something like that. Okay, Christmas Eve. His last words are, "I'm going from this room to the room above." Right? And he died right upstairs in this room. This room you're in is the only original room left in the mansion. We've done a lot of work, a lot of restoration in the last 16 years, but this is a beautiful room that we're in, the East Parlor we call it. So as far as talking about Mr. Waters, I wanted to say a few more things about Mr. Waters before I get into the guns.
All right.
Mr. Waters II, Asa Waters II, he founded the Millbury Bank, which is now the Millbury National Bank, in 1825. He became the president, surprise, and he was the largest stockholder, another surprise, right?
So he had a little influence.
He had a little influence. He also was in the House of Representatives. He got married to Susan Holman, son of a famous Revolutionary War, Colonel Jonathan Holman from Sutton. You got to realize this was all Sutton, and I can't imagine how traumatic it must have been when we broke off from Sutton, the hard feelings it might have caused. So the first guns that were made in the Armory in 1808 were stamped Sutton, but they were made here in Millbury, but they were Sutton at the time.
Right.
So the first musket stamped Millbury was 1814. We became a town in 1813. This musket on the table is the first musket produced in Millbury, stamped Millbury. It's a flintlock. All the guns made up until the Civil War were flintlocks. 35,000 flintlock muskets and 30,000 flintlock pistols. Everything from the Civil War on were percussion, or they even converted flintlocks into percussion, which I can show you here. Let me show you some of this. Take a look at it. Okay. Now I have my own collection. It's under, some of it is here at the mansion. It's under lock and key and alarmed. And I won't tell you how many pieces I have, but I have a pretty good collection. And this one here, you see the browning on this? When the guns were made, they were polished. And some people would pay extra to have them browned. This particular one was not stamped US, which means it wasn't for the government. He also made private, I have a private one that was made for an officer, and it's not stamped US. It's got the man's name on it. I can't read it, but there are names on here. I don't know how good you are. Let's see where it is, right there. It looks like McHood or something.
Yeah, you can see the hood.
McHood here. But each inspector would stamp the barrel. This one isn't stamped with inspector's marks because it wasn't inspected. It wasn't a government gun. It's stamped V for visible. That means it was visibly inspected. If it was stamped by an inspector, his stamps would be on there. Like Jared Perkins would put JP on here. He was one of the 7 inspectors. Joseph Weatherhood was another one. So it would be JW if he inspected it. And it would have US on it. Some of them would have an eagle on it, which was a symbol for war. Another one would have olive branches, which is a symbol for peace. Okay. Now this flintlock, you're familiar with the difference between flint and percussion?
I'm not.
Somewhat.
Okay. All right. This is a piece of flint. When they loaded the musket, you saw movies with Danny Boone, he had the powder horn, he poured powder in there. Okay, well they got a little more sophisticated. By the way, that's a 69 caliber. That's a pretty big hole. 69 caliber. Lead ball went in there. Pretty big lead ball. So you pour 144 grains of powder in it. Now what they did, these people were smart. They couldn't be accurately measuring loose gunpowder. They made cartridges out of paper. And they carried a cartridge belt made out of wood with a cover, and they were like little shotgun shells. And they'd rip the paper off, and then would go the powder. Then you drop the ball. Then you drop the small wad, a small piece of cloth. Then you take the ramrod out, ram it down. Then you'd pick it up. Then you'd put about 10 ounces of powder in the pan, just a little dab. Pull the hammer back, put it in your shoulder, and I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore like I used to. But then you'd release the trigger would make a spark, ignite the powder in the pan, it would go through the hole in the barrel, the firing hole, ignite the powder behind the ball, and out would come a 69 caliber ball, which if it hit you any place, it was going to stop you. It didn't necessarily kill you, but it would stop you, and you would probably die from your wounds. Like when the Civil War broke out, well, I swear most of the casualties were people died in the field because neither side was prepared for this kind of warfare. Even though they fought with almost prehistoric methods like they did in Napoleon's time, standing in line and firing at each other, it was a pretty bloody experience.
In a lot of cases, I imagine during the war, you only got off 1 shot.
A good man could probably load this every 10 seconds and fire a shot, so you're talking 10 to 12 shots a minute. I can't imagine being that fast and getting a good shot off, because it did. Would you like to hold that? That's heavy.
Meanwhile, while
Put
you're
that in your shoulder. Put that in your shoulder. Dory.
Meanwhile, while you're reloading, you're liable to get shot by someone else.
That's right.
It is very heavy.
Those men were strong in those days.
Can you imagine? All day.
Pulling that up. Okay. Now, this is what the Minutemen had, flintlocks. Okay. And when a percussion was a cap that you put there instead of pouring powder, you still loaded the barrel the same way, but instead of having to load powder, there was a cap, you pulled it back. You didn't have to worry about the flint, because the flint would wear out. Then you'd have to take it off, put another piece of flint in there. Without a flint, this gun was useless. If it was a damp, rainy day, the gun was useless. You couldn't fire it. So
Nothing worse than wet powder. Nothing worse than wet powder.
Yeah, thank you. Nothing worse than wet powder. So this gun here is stamped 1814 in Millbury.
Yep.
One of the first guns made in Millbury, in the armory down there. So this is a rare piece. This is in excellent condition, this particular piece. Now this is a flintlock pistol. This is 54 caliber. It's smaller than the musket of 69 caliber. Just the same, that's a pretty big piece of lead hitting you.
Yeah, it is.
Again, it's fired the same way. Pull it back after you load it, prime it the same way. This ramrod is on a swivel.
Oh.
So it made it easier and you wouldn't lose it, wouldn't drop it. Whereas the one on a rifle, the musket isn't. It's not a rifle, it's a musket. The difference between the musket and the rifle is the rifling on the barrel. Now during the Civil War they did start making rifled barrels. And so, and it was instead of a lead ball, it was more of a longer projectile, and it was much more accurate for a greater distance.
It would get the projectile to spin and go on a straighter path.
Right.
Similar to today's bullets,
Right.
self-contained. That one.
So, this one's stamped 1837. Now, were these used in war as well, or was it mainly the muskets? These were.
Oh, yeah. When he got his war in his contract in 1808, he was producing arms for the War of 1812. Some people will ask me, where do you find these guns? Well, a lot of people find them on the internet. And I found them out west. My daughter lives in North Dakota, and I have found them in shops out there. The cavalry had them. I'm sure the Westerners had them.
I'm sure today now, if you were looking on the internet, there's possibility of getting a clone rather than an original piece too.
I've never seen a clone. I've never seen an imitation. It would be very almost impossible, I think. Well, nothing's impossible today, but you look at the engraving. This is A. Waters. I have a pistol that's engraved A. H. Waters. That's rare too, because A. H. Waters was Asa Holman. Okay. This is Asa and his son, A. Waters, 1837, but it doesn't say and son. Sometimes they have the and son engraving on them. I've never really seen one, but that was the name of the company. Millbury, Mass. And he doesn't have any J.H. I think that was Justin Holman was the inspector. There's the U.S., which means this was a government
Issued gun, yeah.
pistol. There's the P for proved. It was proved. So, but it was interesting for me to learn that they just lay these barrels out in a row. I mean, I don't know how many, maybe 100 of them. And they just connect them with gunpowder. And boom, boom, boom,
Close
boom,
the
boom.
door.
Then go in and whichever ones blew up, they throw in a pile and proof them again, and then look and inspect them critically after that. And
You
then,
want to explain this other piece that you have here?
oh, this is a lock plate. This shows you the inner workings of the lock. Interesting thing you'll see in that is every single piece, every screw, every piece of metal is custom made, but has an initial on it for
Yep.
who made it. Every single
Yep.
piece has an
Okay.
initial on it.
Okay.
So these were craftsmen down there making specific pieces of metal for specific things, and they would know if something didn't fit who made it because of your initials on it.
That's amazing.
Now if you go into Millbury National Bank, they have a lock in a case in the lobby in there.
You get a shot of that, Kevin? That's the back side.
But
And this is the side that you would actually see
Yeah.
on a firearm.
well, that pops out very easily too to be cleaned. Just remove that screw, these two screws, and the whole thing comes right out. Now most of the guns I have were bought down south, purchased down south. I purchased very few on the internet. Where did most of the Civil War battles take place?
South Carolina.
South of the Mason-Dixon line. Like the only big battle in the north was in Gettysburg, a 3-day battle in Gettysburg. But most of the battles were in Virginia and down south, all the way as far as Kentucky, Tennessee, all the way down to the coast. So it takes a lot of time, but if you do look around and find a small gun shop and they don't know what they have, you might be able to pick something up at a reasonable price. If you buy it on the internet, you're going to pay top dollar. And you're probably going to buy it at an auction. You're going to be bidding against somebody else. And there's several people in Millbury that collect these. I'm not the only one. The Asa Waters Mansion has the Waters Arms Acquisition Fund, I think it's called, where people donate money so that the Asa Waters Mansion, the Friends of the Asa Waters Mansion, can acquire their own collection. And that collection is on display at the credit union. Joe Barbado has let us set up a display over there. So anyone wants to go look at their collection. Now they've got some very rare, very expensive piece. They have a piece over there made by General Green, Colonel Green, something like that, which I would have not even known was an Asa Waters gun, but he did work with Asa Waters, and and that's probably $5,000 or $6,000 piece. It's a very expensive.
Question on it, if any of our viewers would like to contribute to that fund for the mansion to enhance the collection, what would they do? Where would they go to?
They could either call myself or Catherine Elliott, who is the director here at the mansion. She's a very capable director. She's the best thing that's happened to this mansion since we started the task force 16 years ago. Since she's come on board, she's very knowledgeable. Her and her husband Bob, they're both Revolutionary War reenactors. They live history. They love history. If she were giving you this interview, all the names that I couldn't give you, she could just blur them out to you. Okay, she's a very smart woman. So they do the reenactments, like we've had reenactments here at the mansion, both Civil War and Revolutionary War encampments out here. There's a beautiful picture in the lobby. Kevin might want to get a picture of that on the way out of the last Lincoln visit we had here that I took, kind of like trying to copy a picture that was taken in the 1800s of President Lincoln with his officers, you know, and it came up pretty good. But it's in the back hallway anyway, if you want to check that out.
I think that the next encampment that they have here, that our viewers will be more educated now, knowing about the firearms and the history of the firearms.
It's amazing. It's very interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of things that I haven't even touched upon. There's just so much to just say about Asa Waters II, which is primarily what this building is about. I know you want to do another show someday about the building, but he got married in 1802 to Susan Holman, and they had 8 children. Asa Holman was the only son. He had 7 sisters. I will not get them, but Susan, Seraphina, Fanny Jane, Anna Jane, Harriet, Adelia, and Caroline were the 8 kids. So when Asa Waters died, the son got the business, Asa Holman got the business, Asa Holman got the house. I really don't know what the girls got, if anything. Maybe they had to marry into wealth or whatever they did. I know one of them lived across the street in the Tory house, so one of them married a Tory.
It was interesting reading an article that I printed off the internet of all the people that were related to Waters, and the names are still here in town, the different families, Goodell, and was it a Trask, I believe?
If you read the people that worked, the names of the people that worked at the mill, and you go, I mean, like my wife and I, just crazy thing, but we drive around the cemetery looking at these old graves, and there's some really names over there that I really weren't familiar with, and a lot of them relate back to this mansion and the people that worked at the factory, real old Millbury names, you know. So we've got a lot of great history in this town. This mansion to me is a showpiece. I love it. My whole family's been involved with it. My grandkids have been working here since they were little, volunteering. Everything that's done here is volunteer. And every penny that we put into this building has mostly been donated or grants or money that we've raised in fundraisers.
Well, possibly this program will also entice some of our viewers to come down and offer to volunteer and help out in different functions.
Oh, we can use all the help we can get, you know. It's a very gratifying feeling. Like when we have functions here, and you see, like we do teas, a lot of teas. Yep. The last tea that I worked at here was a children's tea. Little girls come here all dressed up with their mummies, and little boys too. And it was great to see them in the building, and it just, some of them have never been here before, and their eyes open up. And we have Catherine's husband Bob stands guard at the door with his musket, and I'm usually outside greeting him. We have some butlers dressed in period costume, and the girls dressed up in period dress, and it's just an amazing thing. And you say, well, 16 years ago they didn't know what they were going to do with this building, so we're pretty proud of what we accomplished here. The task force has worked very hard, the friends have worked very hard, and like I said, since Catherine's come on board, it's amazing. She just knows what to do. She's very good with the history. And
well, we want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, okay, all right.
Explaining the firearms and the Waters family.
Dory, nice to meet you.
Me too.
I'm sure that our viewers will appreciate everything that transpired today.
Anytime they want to come in to the mansion, they can just contact me or Catherine. We'd love to give tours. Like I said, the Waters family loved Christmas, and their first open house when the mansion was finished. The mansion was finished in 1829, and they had their open house, their first big party, Christmas Eve, 1831. Now, Christmas wasn't widely celebrated in those days. If you go to Sturbridge Village, a circa 1820s village, you'll find out Christmas was not a really big deal back then. Okay, so the Waters family loved Christmas, and in Christmas time here we have an awesome festival. Up on the third floor, we've got my wife's Christmas village set up. But you've been up there, haven't you? It's too big to put at home anymore, so we leave it set up here. But it's appropriate because the Waters family, they just loved Christmas, and they were wonderful. They were very generous people too. You know, he was a rich man, a very smart man, a very smart businessman. But anyway, I've talked too much.
Well, we look forward to coming back and talking to you
That's
some
what
more.
my wife warned me about. You're going to talk too much.
My wife says the same thing. So,
I don't know what she's talking about, Lynn. All right, well, thank you very much.
well, thanks again.
Okay.
And we appreciate it. And you'll be hearing more from us on the mansion itself in future date, and a lot of other historical things that have taken place in this community that are hidden behind the scenes that people don't see or remember. We're going to try to bring you back those memorable events. And comments, Laura?
Just want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching us again.
Say goodbye.
Yeah.
On fire?
No.
Oh, never argue with a woman with a gun.
And you're right, never argue with a woman, period.
And I want to leave you with life is too short. Live life to the fullest every day. Yesterday is gone and tomorrow may never come. Peace be with you.
Good advice, Lenny.
Thank you.